All right, we're going to start. Hi. Welcome, everybody. Let me just reset this thing. And yeah, so this is how we built a government video platform using Vue.js in just 100 days. When we applied for the session, we kind of had to think of a name fast. So, just so you guys know, it's not going to be like a fully headless, decoupled talk. So it's going to be a mix of using Drupal and using Vue.js. And yeah, so you're going to start us off?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Let's see if this clicker
Doesn't work?
doesn't work anymore.
One second.
Waited too long.
No.
Oh.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so this talk is part of this Drupal technology track, and we wanted to thank you, Platform SH, who sponsored this track. Thank you. I also want to remind you all to go here on Friday to become a Drupal contributor. Please do. It's important. It's fun. I'm going to be there. So this is me. My name is David Park. I work as a developer in Sweden, a Drupal developer, and this is my colleague.
Konstantin is my name. Yeah, we also work in Sweden. Originally from Russia, but live in Sweden, work in Sweden. Yeah.
So you can find us on Drupal.org. My name is Dayen, a little hard to pronounce, and Konstantin Kupin.
Yeah, you can see there.
Yeah. So we work for a company called Digitalist, and they are a silver sponsor on this Drupal Europe event, and also sponsored us coming here, having this talk, so thank you. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the project, the client, what this project is all about. We're also going to talk about how we worked with the concept and design team together with the client and with the developers. And then we're going to go into how we build this solution with Drupal and Vue.js.
And show you some examples, code examples and things like that.
Yeah, we're going to show you some code examples. And then we're going to finish up with some learnings and reflections of what we learned during this project. So, the client. We were given this task of building a video platform for the Swedish employment service called Arbetsförmedlingen in Swedish. This platform is supposed to handle different kind of media to help people to find job and educate them in how they should do to find jobs. And up until this point, they had used 3 different kinds of platforms to distribute their content. And they have content like podcasts and video on demands and also live broadcasts. So
webinars.
Webinars, yeah. Yes. And they record them themselves in their own studio, and they can always. You can also participate by entering a chat, so you can have direct contact to the host during these webinars. And they record approximately 10 of these each week. So what they needed was some kind of new shiny platform where we can all import these different kinds of media and then add a bunch of metadata on this, so it will be easier to group them and filter on these and make sorting and all sort of interactions. So why choose Drupal to do this? Well, they needed a great content management tool for once, and with extensive multilingual support. Also user management, and it needed to be an open source platform. So we think that Drupal was the best solution. So far, so good. So we started up by having this design sprint together with the developers, the concept and design team, and the client, of course, where we gathered all the knowledge and people we needed to make fast decisions and also have a common view over the project and also agree on an MVP and also have a wider view of what we wanted to build in the future as well. So you can see we have some pictures here where we are in the war room and trying to figure out how to do this.
Yeah, and we try to involve the developers in this early stage as well. So a lot of the times we could have like maybe a concept and design already finished and we kind of receive it and this is what you should build. So we're trying different approaches and already involving the developers and the architects in the very early stages so we can try to shape the solution together.
Yeah. So the design, the big part of the whole system will be different kinds of media lists where we have interactions where we can do this sorting and filtering and stuff. Also, these lists will be categorized in different kinds of categories. And this is the front page where we also is a media list. And we will also prompt live events. So that was what we got and how to approach this then as a developer. We knew that we have these 3 different APIs we need to do an interaction on to integrate and fetch those media. And we were pretty uncertain about one of the APIs in the beginning, how mature it was. So we planned this project to be that the integration will take a big part of the whole project. So if you look again at the design for one of these media list pages, one of many, where we mix all these kind of different media content. We want this to be, for the end user, very fast and snappy.
Yeah.
So
how do we do this? How do we do this before in Drupal? Yeah.
In the past, when we have a task like this, we were using Drupal core and maybe views, and put up some exposed filters, maybe using the better exposed filters module to get some more help, more functionality on the exposed filters. It could look like this.
Yeah.
Not so close to the design,
of course,
maybe.
not themed, yeah. So what is the issues with this? Of course, we can do this, and I'm sure many of you have done these things. We quite limited about the type of HTML that we get. We have these, I'm going to use my pointer, the checkboxes here, for example. So to achieve this, we would have to restyle it kind of as buttons, right? We would have to hide the checkboxes. Maybe we can use JavaScript submit and listen for check events. Sometimes can get buggy, sometimes can be very slow, and the AJAX calls that Drupal does, you know, and re-renders the DOM also takes some time. So let's say a user is just clicking the filters, trying to find something, you know, and sometimes the AJAX calls just get clash with each other, you know. So as a front-ender perspective, which will be my job, then this is not very nice to work with. We want something clean, and so this is the point when we start thinking, okay, this, like for these type of lists, this is a good case to implement some kind of modern JavaScript framework. So we have like the big 3 names here. For example, Angular is quite big framework. For these smaller things, it seemed kind of unnecessary to include that. React is good. If we want this project to be maintainable and other people coming in later, like let's say people that are not familiar with these types of frameworks, React can be a little bit difficult to get yourself into, you know, and one of those reasons, it's maybe you have to write JSX, or at least everything has to be in JavaScript. So for this reason, we chose Vue.js to be the helper that we need. And why did we choose Vue.js? Well, it's lightweight, for one, so like the production-ready build only weighs around 18 kilobytes. And it's approachable. It has an easy, or easy is the wrong word, but it has a easy learning curve. And what's also good, and a good deal for us, it has template syntax. So, for example, with somebody who works with Twig, very easy to come into a template like this and kind of recognize what's going on there. Easy to read and understand, yeah? And the final point that I'm going to be talking about more here is it's compatible with Twig. So we don't have to throw Twig out completely and just build it inside Vue. We can actually use those and make them coexist together. So I'm going to show you some examples of that, and maybe some of you guys already know this, but that's what we're going to do. So Drupal Twig, Drupal Twig, well, because we have some Drupal functions and stuff that are not in like default Twig that we use, and Vue.js. So you can see up here we have the top, we have the Vue.js instance, and working with Vue.js, we define the new instance, and the L directive here is what assigns and binds it into the element. So you can see that I have the ID app, and in my Twig file, the div with the ID app. That means that Vue.js will take over, and I'll be able to run all of the functions and the commands of Vue.js inside that div, okay? And the other thing we need to think about when working with Vue.js and Twig is that Twig already uses by default the same delimiters that Vue.js has by default. But luckily, we can change that with the delimiters attribute or whatever parameter. And you can set it to basically whatever you want. So you can see here in the Twig example, I have the Twig syntax, and the other brackets is going to be the Vue.js variables or whatever that I'm using. So just to show you what the benefits of this, so I can use the functions that we have, for example, attached library, or I'm adding classes from the classes array that we already have in Twig. I can use translations, so I have the H1 here, page title, and it's a T-string, so I can use all of those default functions that we already have. And furthermore, Vue.js has no problem of running its code here. So we can see a v4. This is basically a for loop, and I'm just looping over some whatever items and printing out the title, for example. Yeah. So this is really nice, and we can make use of both. So this became the recipe that we use for the project. We will have Drupal. We're going to use Vue.js, and we're going to combine it with Twig. And we need some kind of endpoint that we will make calls to actually get the data, because we need to get it inside of the JavaScript somehow. So how do we achieve this in Drupal? There's a lot of talking about JSON API, for example. In our case, we only need it for specific things. So getting an export of everything on the site might be too much. We can always do it custom, just do a custom module and do those and make some kind of export. But we chose to do it with views. So to do that, we just need to enable these two modules, web services and serialization. And it gives us the ability to create normal views as REST export. So this will be an example of that. We have a REST export, and you can choose to export full entities. Then you will get kind of a default export already structured. For our case, we want specific things, and most cases, I think, we use this. We use the fields. So here I'm only exporting specific fields, and I can decide what I want, how I want it. And you can see I have the title and the created date or authored on, for example. If we step in here, inside in settings, we can actually rename and redefine the data and call it whatever we want it to be. The only downside here would be that we cannot really group it and structurize into sub-objects or sub-arrays just by doing this. I think you could achieve that by grouping the fields, actually, and getting something like that, but I haven't really looked into it so much. So If you want a lot of flexibility, then you would have to somehow alter this export later. So this would be an example of what it will look like. You can see, let me show you. So in the path settings, this is actually where you define what your path is going to be for this export. And yeah, just an example. This is we're exporting ID, title, description, whatever, the things that we need and we'll be consuming in our Vue.js application. So, consuming the data. Now we have the data and we need to make the request somehow. For this, we're using Axios. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this library. It's a promise-based HTTP client for the browser and also Node.js. So it's quite easy to use. We're using ES6 and just importing with npm and so on. So pretty straightforward stuff. You can easily handle the responses and errors and work with it in a fast way. Also, it's easy to pass parameters. I will show you a little bit of the examples of how we do it in this case. So there's quite a lot of code I hope you can see. So yeah, you can see here again we're defining the new Vue instance and I'm assigning it to the element. I have the delimiters and in Vue.js, for those that you don't know, we have all of the data that we're going to use in our Vue.js app is going to be inside the data object. And in this case, for this example, I just have a list, and this list will actually contain all of the items that I will later render in my page. So what we're going to do is here I'm defining the constant variable, just API, the path. And here you can see we're using Axios get. You can add parameters. For example, we will have infinite scroll. Well, not really infinite scroll, but click to load more. And we will have to pass page arguments and some kind of type arguments and things like that. So you can easily pass it there. And then here you have the response. And in the response, we will call for, when working with Vue.js and referring to itself, you always use this. So I say that this list, and then I concatenate the array and add my new items that I get. So let's take a look at this again. This is what it's supposed to look like. And all of these are going to be links. So when I click on a picture or anywhere I wanted to go to the landing page, straightforward. And this way, what it can look inside the twig file. So you can see that I'm starting off here with a v4 is a for loop, and I'm just looping inside the list. Nothing very advanced. A good directive to talk about as well is the vHTML directive. So, for example, if I have some kind of vis-a-vis markup or any HTML that's coming in, Vue.js is going to escape it by default. So I will just get a string with tags in it. So to avoid this, instead of just printing a variable, I'm actually using this vHTML directive, which tells Vue.js that I should interpret this data as HTML, and it will populate my tag or whatever in this case where I'm assigning it. Also, these colons are a shorthand for vbind, the other directive, which pretty much in the same way as vHTML, it binds the data to our. So in this case, we have the link attribute, and we have the source attribute where we bind to this data that's coming from Vue.js. We also have different types of media, so we can make the same, pretty much the same way as in Twig. In Vue.js, we make if statements, and so you see I have a webinar and I have a podcast, and if I have a podcast, I need to show a little icon that to just notify the end user that this is not a video. And yeah, you can see here, so do a if statement, and I check if the type is podcast, then I will show this icon, for example. Yeah? So these are some examples for you. I will show you a little bit of event handling. And to do that, I'm going to use the load more button. It's in Swedish, but it actually says load more. You'll have to believe me. So when we click that, we want to populate my array with the new more items, right? So in Vue.js, we have the v-on directive, and this is also shorthand for that. So I'm saying at click, when I click on this element, then I will do something. And here you can write, you could write plain JavaScript. That's not really best practice, but if it's something very simple like setting something to true or false or whatever, then you can do it like that. But here I'm actually calling a method. And this method will be represented inside my Vue.js instance. So inside Vue.js, this is the JavaScript file, and we have a methods object, and all of the methods are basically functions that my Vue app can use. And I have the load more method, and I'm doing, again, the same thing. I will be doing a get request with Axios. The first thing I do is I increment the page, so I have an attribute that keeps track of what page I'm on. I increment that, and then I make the get request, and I pass this argument here as a parameter to the request. There we go. So I'm going to show you a little bit also about how we work and how we structure our theme. So we work component-based. We're not necessarily using any modules like the component module, for example, contrib module, or whatever else there is. It's more about structuring the folders. Yeah, so every component would contain a twig file, a JavaScript, and a CSS file with all of the data or whatever that has to do with that specific component. So it could look like something like this. We have a components folder, and we're experimenting with different setups, and lately we're trying to see everything as a component, and if it's something global, then we put it inside of a global component. So here you can see I have a media list HTML twig, I have a JavaScript file, and I have a CSS file. So maybe you already see that this twig file is not like Drupal suggestion. This is basically just a whatever name that we just created this file and called it html.twig, media list. And what's nice about this, that in this case, this file will only contain the markup, the twig syntax that I need, the Vue.js syntax that I need for this component. And what I can do later is I can import this twig file into any other template. So in this example, we are in taxonomy term full. When I go to a landing page for taxonomy term, I wanted to list all of the content that is tagged with that specific term, for example, right? So I could just write all of the Vue.js markup, everything, just straight inside this twig file. That would work perfectly. But in my case, I want to be able to reuse the same list in different places. So I'm just using the include function here, and I'm pointing to my component of media list. If you want it to be really, like, how do you say, performant, you can just define a separate library for your specific component and attach it to your twig file. So that means that this Vue.js will only actually be loaded when you're running the twig file that uses this library, for example. What's good about Vue.js as well, if some of you are thinking about doing it, and like pros and cons and stuff, and it's very easy to, it's using the components, component system by itself, Vue.js. I'm not going to go into that so much, but I'm going to show you an example of how you can reuse components that somebody already did. And in this case, I'm using a v-lazy image component. It's a lazy loader for images. So when my page loads, I don't want it to wait for the images and be slow. I want it to show a placeholder first, and then as we scroll and as the images are loaded, they will start popping up on the screen. So again, using npm, I find this lazy image component. I can just import it into my JavaScript file, and the only other thing I need to do is to make sure to let my Vue.js instance know that I'm going to use this component in this case. And I do it down there. You can see I'm defining the components. So all of the components that you will use in your instance, you define here. And when I've done that, this is how it looks inside of the template file. you can see that we have the vLazy image here. I just write it as a tag. This is not normal HTML markup, but Vue.js will figure that out and interpret that and replace it with the proper markup that's actually included inside of this component. And I just pass the necessary arguments, whatever is required there. So a lot of the things that you're looking for, you can reuse, maybe find something already built, the same way that we do with contrib modules. And we're going to show you a little bit of a demo, if it works. Let's see, this one, just some of these lists and the filtering that we're doing. So yes, so we're going now to a term landing page for the term, and we're getting all, you can see that I get the placeholders first and the images start coming in. And we will also see some of the filtering. And now everything now is cold cache. So when you have seen this once, it goes much faster, maybe 1 or 2 milliseconds. Yeah, different type of filters in different places, and you can reuse the same endpoints for all of your filters, so you can have as many filters as you want. Load more function, for example. Yeah, this is how it looks like. So let's see, I'm gonna, no. Okay, so we're gonna finish with some reflections about this, how we approach the project, and now I have to look at my notes, what I said. Okay, yeah, so this is what people refer to, I guess, as progressive decoupling. What's nice about this, you can start off small. Of course, we have much more portions of the site that we're using Vue.js, but we won't show you to you today, just in the purpose of the presentation. We use it for the search in the same way, because the search is basically a list, and you can use it in many other ways. So you can start off small. It doesn't weigh so much if you're using Vue.js. Easy to combine with Twig. Is Drupal developer friendly? What does it mean by that? I mean that if you're using Twig, you're using those things. It's not a big step to get into Vue.js and start using it in your projects in smaller pieces. And you don't have to go full headless and just take a big risk. Maybe a lot of times you're doing projects and it's a matter of money and time, and you need to take all of the things in consideration. So in this way, it's quite easy to get to learn those things and progress from there. Yeah, it's quite fast, snappy, gives you the user's good interface, good. Do you have something you want to add?
No, I think that sums up a little bit about the reflections, yes.
We were fast, actually. We were really fast. I don't know why. Okay, so we have a lot of time left. But I think it's going to be questions now. So if you guys have any questions, we will try to answer them the best way we can. Yes.
Awesome presentation. Thank you very much. I think you already said, but there was any technical reason for not going fully decoupled, or I don't know, the client or B or something like that, or it was just to not taking the full risk of going fully decoupled?
So I think one of those is like budget and time, and another thing is like David said earlier, we had. So first of all, it depends on what kind of APIs you're working with. Maybe we wouldn't need Drupal at all. We can only consume the data from these APIs and kind of build the presentation layer in Vue, for example, or any other framework. But in this case, we need to import all of this data into Drupal, and they wanted to categorize it. They wanted to make some kind of playlists with it and other things like that we haven't shown you. So that was a big factor. One of these APIs was, I'm not going to say which one, just in case. But one of the APIs was very, well, it was hardly an API, so we had to kind of work with them and try to make the best of it. So a lot of the risk was there, and adding even more risk on top of that would mean that, so this was a way for us to build. And actually, we're only presenting content, so we're presenting it, and the the biggest user interactions lie within these filters and maybe searching and so on. So otherwise, it's static pages, you know. So if you don't really have the use case that you have a lot of interactions from the user, then maybe it's not necessary to go all the way. Yeah. More questions? All right.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for the presentation, first of all. You said at some point that you wanted that you were to use between JSON API or the REST API, right?
Yeah.
Why did you choose the REST API instead of the JSON API? Is there a reason or? Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know. But, well, for one, we haven't worked with JSON API so much before. We have done a lot of custom stuff. And when we were doing this, we were doing a little bit of prototyping and let's try this, you know. I need it for this specific reason. I don't have a reason that I need to export all of the nodes, all of the things, and have them accessible. So I don't know if maybe it would be just as fast and just as easy to do that. We also had different type of filters and parameters. I'm not very familiar, like I said, with the JSON API module, but I don't know how much and how easily you can configure filtering and things like that. In the Vue, you do it just by adding a filter like you do in any other Vue, and you can define what the query string would be called and so on. So it's quite easy to, I mean, you can do that in 10 minutes and you have an export. So that's the main reason. You have want to say something more about that? No? No, okay. Yeah. If that's. Yeah. Yeah, it was an easy way to try it out, and it felt like an overkill to put in the big module to do that. Yeah.
I have a question. Did you run into any issues with hosting video content in Drupal in terms of performance and any optimizations that had to be done around that?
Well, in our case, we're lucky because we're not actually running any type of player. So a lot of the video content we have, or all of them, have their own services. So basically, we have iframes that point to the respective server. The podcast service that they're using already has a player for the podcast. So in that way, if we would have that, that would be a much bigger and more difficult project. Yeah. So that was good for us. Yeah.
Did you come across any issues with like SEO in terms of server-side rendering and things like that using Vue?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. I'm not 100% sure because we haven't actually released the site yet. But we will do investigations. We have the good part is that we're not rendering the full site in JavaScript once again. So Drupal is rendering the site, and then we take over some of the parts. And from my understanding, the Vue.js would still be executed, and it will load the list. We're using normal 8 tags, and we're not doing like a div and then on click we do something. So I think that from my understanding, as long as the URL structure is correct, when we do filtering, that's one of the things you have to do. You have to update the URL with the right queries and whatever. So the URL structure reflects what you're doing with the filters and stuff. So if you copy that URL, you're supposed to navigate there, you're supposed to get the same result. So I think that's one of the things that Google looks at as well, the URL structure with. No major issues, but we will see how it goes.
Yeah, it's kind of related to that, really. Does the page work without JavaScript?
The page does not. I mean, the page will work, but you will not get a list.
But could you make it work? Could you have like a fallback option or something?
Well, yeah, I guess we could check if JavaScript is enabled, and in that case, like if we're still working with views in Drupal, we could have the data export, and then we can have a normal view that just lists things and do that. And then the thing that would suffer from that will be filtering, because JavaScript wouldn't be enabled, so you wouldn't be able to do some kind of auto-submit functionality anyway, so you would have to click buttons, right? So, but you could do that, sure. Yeah, why not? Any more? No? All right, I guess that we're done. Thank you. We hope that you enjoyed it. It's the first presentation from me as well, actually, so it's a good experience. Thank you.